The auctioneer's voice echoed through the dusty town square, each word a hammer driving shame deeper into Sarah's heart. She stood on the wooden platform, eyes fixed on the splintered boards beneath her feet, refusing to meet the curious and pitying gazes of the crowd below. A hard-working woman, good with household duties, can read and write. The auctioneer droned on, his voice devoid of emotion. He might as well have been selling livestock, Sarah thought bitterly. In a way, he was. Her parents stood at the edge of the crowd, her mother's face hidden behind a handkerchief, her father's jaw set in grim determination. 5 years of marriage to Thomas Whitmore had produced no children, and in their small Montana town in 1887, that was an unforgivable sin for a woman. When Thomas died in a mining accident, his family had wasted no time declaring the marriage contract void and sending Sarah back to her parents' doorstep like a defective piece of merchandise. Her father, crushed by debt from a failed harvest, had made his choice. Better to recoup some money for her care than to feed another useless mouth. The word Barren had been whispered so many times in the past weeks that it had lost all meaning, becoming just another sound, like the wind through the prairie grass. The bidding was lackluster. A few farmers looking for cheap labor offered half-hearted amounts. Sarah kept her head down, swallowing the tears that threatened to spill. This was her life now, reduced to dollars and cents, her worth measured only in what work her hands could do since her womb had failed her. $50. The voice cut through the murmuring crowd, deep and quiet but carrying a weight that made people turn. Sarah's eyes flickered up despite herself. A man stood at the back of the crowd, tall and weathered, with dark hair streaked with gray at the temples. His face was lined with the kind of exhaustion that came from years of hard living, but his eyes were kind. He held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously. "That's James Brennan," someone whispered nearby. "Lost his wife 2 years back in childbirth. Left him with 5 young ones to raise alone." The auctioneer's eyes lit up at the prospect of a real bid. $50 from Mr. Brennan. "Do I hear 60? Silence fell over the square. No one wanted to bid against James Brennan. He was respected in these parts, known as a fair man who'd suffered more than his share of loss. If he needed help with those children, folks reasoned, he deserved it. "Sold to Mr. Brennan for $50. Sarah's knees nearly buckled. She'd been sold. Actually sold. The reality of it crashed over her like a wave. James Brennan approached the platform, counted out the money to the auctioneer, and then turned to her. Up close, she could see the deep lines of worry etched around his eyes, the calluses on his hands, the mended patch on his shirt sleeve. "Ma'am," he said softly, offering his hand to help her down from the platform. "I have a wagon waiting." Sarah took his hand, her own trembling. His grip was warm and steady. She followed him through the parting crowd, feeling dozens of eyes on her back. Her mother didn't even turn around. Her father collected the money without a word. The wagon was old but well-maintained, and Sarah climbed up onto the seat beside James. They rode in silence for the first mile, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon wheels and the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, golden grass rippling like water under the afternoon sun. "I suppose you're wondering what kind of man buys a woman," James finally said, his voice rough. He didn't look at her, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. Sarah didn't know what to say, so she remained quiet. "I'm not a bad man, Mrs. Whitmore. I want you to know that. I need help, that's true. 5 children between the ages of 2 and 11, and I'm failing them. The house is a disaster, the youngest cries for a mother she doesn't remember, and I can't cook worth a damn. But I won't treat you poorly. You'll have your own room, respect, and fair treatment. That's my promise to you. Why didn't you just hire help?" Sarah asked quietly. James was silent for a long moment. "Tried that. 3 different women. They all left within a month. Said my children were too wild, too much trouble. I thought maybe if it was more permanent, more like a family." He trailed off, seeming embarrassed. "I know it's not a real marriage I'm offering. I know you've been through an ordeal. But maybe we can help each other." Sarah studied his profile, the honest set of his jaw, the genuine distress in his voice when he spoke of his children. "What are their names?" she asked. His face softened immediately. "Matthew's the oldest, just turned 11. Then there's Emma, she's 9. The twins, Jack and Lucy, are 6. And little Rose just turned 2 last month." He glanced at her, something almost like hope in his eyes. "They're good kids. Just lost and hurting." The house appeared on the horizon as the sun began its descent, a simple wooden structure with a sagging porch and curtains that hung crooked in the windows. As they pulled up, the front door burst open and children spilled out like puppies, all except for a small figure that remained in the doorway, silhouetted against the lamplight from within. "Pa!" The twins reached the wagon first, shouting over each other. "Mrs. Henderson from town brought bread, but Jack fed his to the chickens and Lucy broke the—" "One at a time," James said, but there was warmth in his voice. He climbed down, and then offered his hand to Sarah again. 5 pairs of eyes fixed on her with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion. "Children, this is Mrs. Whitmore. She's going to be staying with us, helping to take care of things." James's voice was gentle but firm. "I expect you to treat her with respect and kindness." The older boy, Matthew, stood with his arms crossed, his young face set in hard lines. "We don't need anyone. We're doing fine on our own." "Matthew," James warned. But Sarah understood the boy's hostility. She knelt down slowly, bringing herself to the level of the younger children. "I imagine this is strange for all of you. It's strange for me too. But your father has been kind enough to give me a place to stay, and I'd like to be helpful if you'll let me." Little Rose, the toddler, suddenly lurched forward from the doorway where she'd been held by Emma. She stumbled on chubby legs right up to Sarah and grabbed her skirt with sticky fingers, staring up at her with enormous blue eyes. "Mama?" the tiny voice asked, hopeful and heartbreaking. Sarah felt something crack open in her chest. She looked up at James helplessly. His face was pained, and he moved to pick up Rose, but Sarah shook her head slightly. Instead, she carefully gathered the little girl into her arms. "No, sweetheart, I'm not your mama. But I'm Sarah, and I'm here now." Rose studied her face intently, then laid her head on Sarah's shoulder with a sigh that seemed far too heavy for such a small person. Over the child's downy head, Sarah met James's eyes. They were bright with unshed tears. That first night was chaos. The house was indeed a disaster, with clothes strewn everywhere, dishes piled in the wash basin, and a layer of dust over everything. But beneath the mess, Sarah could see the bones of a home that had once been loved. A sampler on the wall with careful stitching. Curtains that someone had made by hand. A rocking chair by the fireplace, worn smooth from use. Sarah didn't try to do everything at once. She made a simple supper from what she could find in the pantry, burned it only slightly, and served it to the family at a table she'd quickly cleared. Matthew still glared at her suspiciously, but the twins chattered away, and Emma watched her with cautious curiosity. Rose wouldn't leave her side, tiny hand clutching Sarah's skirt. After supper, as James took the boys to the barn to tend the animals, Emma appeared at Sarah's elbow. "Would you like to see our rooms?" the girl asked shyly. The tour revealed more heartbreak. Emma trying to keep herself and her little sister neat but overwhelmed by the task, the twins' room a disaster of boyish chaos, Matthew's sparse space with a picture of a pretty woman on the small table beside his bed. Their mother, Sarah realized. Margaret Brennan, forever young and smiling. "She was very beautiful," Sarah said softly to Matthew, who'd followed them upstairs. "She was the best person in the whole world," Matthew said fiercely. "Nobody could ever replace her. Nobody. I wouldn't dream of trying," Sarah replied honestly. "I'm sure she was wonderful. You're lucky to have had her, even for the time you did." Something in Matthew's expression shifted, the hostility wavering slightly. That night, in the small room James had given her off the kitchen, Sarah finally allowed herself to cry. She cried for the life she'd lost, for the children she'd never have, for the humiliation of being sold like property. But she also cried for 5 motherless children, and a lonely widower trying his best and failing. She cried for a little girl who couldn't remember her mother's face and a boy trying so hard to be strong. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, the house began to transform. Sarah rose before dawn and worked until late evening, but it wasn't the brutal, thankless labor she'd feared. The children, even Matthew, began to soften toward her. She learned that Emma loved to read, that the twins were inseparable troublemakers with hearts of gold, that Matthew carried the weight of being the man of the house on his thin shoulders, and that little Rose was a cuddler who'd crawl into any available lap for stories and songs. James was true to his word. He treated her with unfailing respect and courtesy, never demanding more than she could give, always grateful for her efforts. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side in comfortable silence, occasionally sharing stories of their pasts over coffee after the children were in bed. 2 months after her arrival, as Sarah was tucking Rose into bed, the little girl grabbed her face with both hands. "Love you," she announced firmly, then kissed Sarah's nose. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too, sweet girl." In the doorway, unnoticed, James stood watching, his heart full for the first time in 2 years. Winter came, and with it, the forced intimacy of a family spending long evenings together by the fire. Sarah taught Emma to embroider, helped the twins with their letters, and slowly coaxed Matthew into teaching her about the animals. They told stories, played games, and gradually, laughter returned to the Brennan house. One evening, after an especially boisterous supper, James found Sarah on the porch despite the cold. She was wrapped in a shawl, staring out at the star-filled sky. "They told me I was worthless," she said quietly. "Defective. A failed woman because I couldn't give Thomas a child." She turned to look at James, her eyes bright. "But these children, they've given me purpose. They've made me feel needed. Loved even. How strange that what I couldn't create, I could still nurture." James moved beside her, close but not touching. "You've given us back our lives, Sarah. You've made this a home again. That's not worthless. That's everything." In the spring, when the wildflowers bloomed across the prairie, James asked Sarah if she would consider making their arrangement permanent and legal. Not because he'd bought her, but because somewhere in the long Montana winter, amidst the chaos of raising 5 children together, they'd built something real. Sarah looked at the man who'd chosen her when she'd been at her lowest, who'd given her not just a home but a family, who'd shown her that worth wasn't measured in one way alone. She thought of 5 children who called her name, who ran to her with scraped knees and hurt feelings, who taught her that love came in many forms. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes." The town that had witnessed her humiliation witnessed her wedding too, and if some whispered about the strangeness of it all, others saw only a family made whole again. Matthew stood as James's best man, tall and proud, finally able to let go of the weight he'd been carrying. Emma held Rose during the ceremony, both girls beaming. The twins fidgeted but behaved. Sarah had been sold as barren, worthless, defective. But she'd been chosen by a lonely cowboy who saw what she truly had to offer. And in the end, she became mother to 5 children who needed her just as desperately as she needed them, proving that family isn't always about blood or birth, but about showing up, day after day, and choosing love.